Years ago, when I was still finding my way through the maze of high school, a day unfolded that remains etched in my memory, vivid and unsettling. It was a routine day, structured around the familiar beats of class, lunch, and then study hall. I was in 10th grade at the time, and gym class was my last session before lunch. It was my favorite, laid back and enjoyable, a perfect lead into the midday break. Our school had a peculiar way of managing study halls. We usually headed back to the same classroom we'd been in before lunch. However, since gym didn't really have a classroom, we'd get assigned different locations whenever our usual teacher had a prep hour during study hall time. Occasionally, this meant staying in the gym, which was odd but not unheard of. We'd spread out across the bleachers or sit right on the polished wooden floor, textbooks and notebooks sprawled around us. On this particular day, I lingered in the lunchroom a bit longer than usual, chatting and laughing with friends. The atmosphere was relaxed. Our gym teacher wasn't strict about punctuality for study hall, so a minute or two late wasn't a big deal. By the time I started heading back, the hallways were deserted, the echo of my footsteps a stark contrast to the usual cacophony. As I approached what I thought was our designated classroom, something felt off. The door was shut, and a twist of the handle confirmed my suspicions. It was locked. Peering through the window, I noticed the lights inside were off, which was unusual. Turning away, I assumed there must have been a last-minute change to meet in the gym instead. I couldn't recall being told about this, but then again, the details might have slipped through the cracks of lunchtime laughter and chatter. With a shrug, I redirected my steps toward the gym, my mind still replaying the lunchtime conversations, not fully registering the oddity of the situation. That was when the first strands of unease began to weave through my thoughts, punctuated sharply by the sudden blare of the school's intercom. "This is a lockdown, and this is not a drill." The announcement echoed through the empty hallway, a voice of calm authority that sent a chill down my spine. "Please remain in your classrooms, and no students are to be out in the halls." Halfway to the gym, the message finally sank in. My steps faltered as the reality of the situation started to take shape. The locked classroom door wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. I quickened my pace towards the gym, now worried but still slightly confused. When I arrived, the double doors were firmly shut, the usual welcoming entrance now a barrier. They were locked too. It dawned on me then. Everyone else must have known to stay in the classroom. The pieces clicked together, albeit slowly, and I felt a flush of embarrassment mixed with rising panic. How had I missed the memo? Turning back, I retraced my steps towards the classroom at a near run, the empty hallways amplifying my growing sense of isolation. The school felt different, eerier, more imposing. As I approached the corner leading back to the classroom, a loud bang rang out, echoing off the lockers like a gunshot. It sounded deliberate, like someone had slammed their fist against metal or thrown something heavy. My heart leapt into my throat. Time slowed as a cocktail of adrenaline and fear surged through my veins. The hall that had felt merely empty a moment ago now seemed menacing, charged with a tangible threat. I stopped dead in my tracks, every instinct screaming at me to flee. Instead of continuing towards my classroom, I turned and walked swiftly in the opposite direction, desperate to put distance between myself and the source of the noise. Footsteps echoed behind me, growing louder, hastening. Someone was following me, and from the urgency of their pace, they were catching up. Panic took over. I spotted a staircase to my left, an escape route. I bolted, taking the stairs two at a time, my breath ragged. At the bottom, I sprinted down the hallway, spotting a classroom and hammering on the door in desperation. "Please let me in." I pounded on the door, tried the handle. It was locked. No response from inside. Were they even there? The footsteps descended the staircase now, rapid and unrelenting. I glanced back, catching a glimpse of legs. A teacher? A student? An intruder? I couldn't tell, and I didn't want to find out. Just as the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and started towards me, the classroom door swung open. A teacher's face appeared, eyes wide with alarm. They pulled me inside quickly and shut the door with a decisive click. The room was dark, students huddled at the back on the floor. The door locked again, and not a moment too soon. As it clicked shut, someone tried the handle from the outside, then banged on the door, persistent and unsettling. Inside, the teacher motioned for silence, and we all obeyed, the tension palpable. As we waited in the dim light, the weight of the moment settled over us. The teacher peeked through the door's window, then turned away, her expression unreadable. Silence reigned, thick and heavy, as we sat in the dark, waiting, not knowing what was happening outside our makeshift sanctuary. The lockdown stretched on, a tense eternity that tested every nerve. Finally, the intercom cracked to life once more, signaling the end of the lockdown. But the relief was tempered by the shadows of unanswered questions and the echo of my pounding heart. Once the lockdown was lifted, the tension in the classroom melted into a flood of quiet relief and whispered questions. The teacher cautiously opened the door, peeking into the hallway before signaling it was safe to exit. I stepped out into the light, the normalcy of the hallway now seeming alien after the dark, crowded confines of the classroom. As students dispersed, a palpable sense of unease lingered in the air, an invisible thread connecting us all in our shared experience of fear and uncertainty. I made my way to the principal's office, my legs shaky, my mind racing with the need for answers. Upon arrival, the principal's secretary ushered me in immediately, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a solemn nod. The principal sat behind his desk, his face grave as he motioned for me to sit. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of concern and formality. "Yes, I think so," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Good. I'm glad you're safe. Now, I need to understand exactly what happened with you during the lockdown. It's important we get a clear picture of all student movements." I recounted the events as best I could, from the moment I left the lunchroom to the harrowing minutes pounding on the classroom door. The principal listened intently, his expression unreadable, nodding occasionally as he took notes. Once I finished, he remained silent for a moment, then spoke. "Thank you for your account. It's going to help us piece everything together. Can you tell me what caused the lockdown?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity and lingering fear. He hesitated, then replied, "It was a security threat. Someone reported seeing a suspicious person near the back entrance. We had to ensure the safety of everyone. The police responded and secured the area, but they didn't find anyone." A chill ran down my spine at his words. The thought of a stranger, possibly armed, so close to where we were, was unnerving. "Was anyone hurt?" I asked, hoping for some reassurance. "No, thankfully, everyone is safe. But we're going to review our security protocols to make sure we can prevent and better manage such situations in the future." I nodded, a mix of relief and residual anxiety swirling within me. The principal thanked me again for my cooperation and dismissed me, but as I left his office, the answers provided little comfort. The halls of the school, usually bustling with noise and life, now echoed with a haunting silence that matched the hollow feeling inside me. For the rest of the day, classes resumed, but the atmosphere was different. Teachers and students alike seemed distracted, their interactions tinged with the shadow of the day's events. Whispers and rumors swirled through the hallways, each retelling a different version of what might have happened, who the suspicious person was, and what their intentions could have been. I tried to focus on the lessons, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the noises I heard. The loud bang, the footsteps, the terrifying moment when I thought I was being pursued. Who had been behind me? Was it the suspicious person the principal mentioned, or just another student caught out of class? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. As the school day finally ended, I walked home, the familiar streets offering little comfort. The normal sounds of the neighborhood felt distant, as if I was moving through a fog. Once home, I went straight to my room, the events of the day replaying over and over in my mind. The feeling of being chased, the pounding on the classroom door, the cold fear. Each memory was vivid, starkly imprinted in my thoughts. That night, sleep was fitful. The shadows in my room seemed darker, every small noise a reminder of the day's fear. I lay awake, the ceiling a blank canvas for my restless mind, questions circling like vultures over a carcass. What if the door hadn't opened? What if the suspicious person had found me? The next morning brought no relief. The routine of preparing for school was mechanical, each action performed without thought. Breakfast was a silent affair. My parents were concerned, their occasional glances filled with unspoken questions. They knew something serious had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to recount the details. It felt as if speaking about it would make it all too real, too close. Stepping back into the school, the weight of the previous day's events hung heavy in the air. The usual greetings were muted, the smiles strained. I moved through the day like a ghost, present but not fully there, my thoughts always returning to that moment of sheer panic. The school had increased security, a reassurance that felt both comforting and alarming. Police officers patrolled the hallways, their presence a stark reminder of the vulnerability we had all felt. Teachers were more attentive, their eyes scanning the classrooms, looking for signs of distress among their students. As I sat in class, trying to focus on the teacher's words, I realized that the school, my safe haven of learning and friendship, had been transformed. It was no longer just a place of books and exams, but a battleground where we had all faced our fears. The innocence of my high school experience had been shattered, replaced by a harsher reality where danger could lurk around any corner. The lockdown was over, but its echoes would resonate long after, a haunting melody that underscored the rest of my time at school. The questions remained, some answered, many not, but the biggest question of all was one I carried with me. How do we find peace in the knowledge that safety is not guaranteed? And how do we keep living fully in the shadow of fear? The days following the lockdown morphed into weeks, each passing moment a step further away from the immediate terror, but a step deeper into a lingering unease. Conversations at school gradually shifted back to regular topics. Upcoming tests, weekend plans, the usual high school banter. But the underlying current of the lockdown's impact was always there, a subtle but unmistakable undercurrent in every interaction. My friends and I discussed it less as time went on, focusing instead on the normalcy we all craved. Yet, during quiet moments, the gaps between classes, the lulls in conversation at lunch, the topic would resurface, a shared glance or a hesitant question bringing it all back. "Have you heard anything new?" someone would ask. The answers were always the same. No new information, just the same vague reassurances from the administration. I was 17 in my junior year of high school, living in a sleepy town in Illinois where the biggest event was the annual 4th of July parade. The school year had just kicked into full gear, autumn leaves painting the sidewalks as we marched from class to class. My school schedule was packed, and like most of my peers, the rhythm of the school day had become second nature. There were 9 periods, and my 5th was lunch, a welcome breather before heading to my next class. Astronomy was straight after lunch, taught in a peculiar part of the school, the basement. Our high school, a towering 3-story structure of classic brick and mortar, seemed to stretch endlessly, its hallways buzzing with the energy of teenage ambition and angst. But even this grand building wasn't enough to host all the classes offered, leading to the creation of 2 additional classrooms in an unlikely place below ground. Formerly a janitorial domain, these basement rooms had been revamped into something resembling a typical school corridor. The remodel was decent, but the absence of intercoms made it feel disconnected from the rest of the school. This section, fondly dubbed the chamber by students, became somewhat of a legend for its air conditioning and a reputation for hosting easier classes, plus the bonus of a private bathroom. That particular day, we had a quiz in astronomy. I breezed through the questions, astronomy always capturing my imagination more than any myth or story could. With time to spare and restless energy to burn, I pulled out my phone and shot a text to my buddy, Warren, who was in the other basement classroom. Meet me in the chamber bathroom. Done with the quiz and bored. His reply was quick. On my way. I strolled out into the dimly lit hallway, the quiet making each step sound louder than usual. Moments later, Warren pushed through the bathroom door, his grin contagious. "Dude, you won't believe it," he whispered, checking his phone again. "Someone just texted that the school's going on lockdown." Our eyes met, twin smirks of mischief spreading across our faces. Our teachers hadn't seen us leave. The lockdown meant we could roam the deserted corridors without notice. Driven by a blend of curiosity and the thrill of breaking rules, we decided to venture upstairs. "Let's just see what's going on," I suggested, my voice low. The transition from the basement to the main school was startling. The usually bright and bustling hallways were now shrouded in darkness, the only light seeping in from the glass doors of the front lobby. This wasn't normal. During previous drills, the lights always remained on. As we hesitated at the top of the stairs, Warren nudged me. "Hey, who's that?" His tone had shifted from mischievous to tense. Squinting into the darkness, I saw a figure moving towards us. Initially, it was hard to make out details, but as the silhouette grew closer, it was clear he wasn't a teacher. His clothes were ragged, his walk uneven, a stark contrast to the usual staff attire. "Let's head back," I murmured, my heart pounding louder with each step as we retreated to the basement. We ducked back into the bathroom just in time, as the sound of footsteps echoed faintly above. In the safety of the dimly lit bathroom, we chose the corner stall, shutting off the light and crouching down. "What if he saw us?" Warren whispered, his voice barely audible. I shushed him, listening intently. The distant footsteps seemed to fade, but the sense of unease hung heavily in the air. We were 2 kids, hiding out during a lockdown, possibly from more than just a rule-breaking escapade. The thrill of adventure was quickly turning into a real concern. But little did we know, our day was about to become even more unsettling. The air in the bathroom was thick with tension and the musty smell of seldom-used plumbing, a stark contrast to the crisp, conditioned air of the hallways outside. As I leaned back against the cold tile wall of the corner stall, my heart drummed a nervous beat in my chest, resonating with each pulse through my whole body. Warren, equally silent beside me, shifted his weight from one foot to another, a habit when he was anxious. Minutes dragged like hours in that cramped space, every second amplifying our breaths and the distant, indistinct sounds reverberating through the school's structure. Occasionally, muffled thumps or the squeal of what could have been doors swinging echoed down to our hideout, heightening the sense of unreal suspense wrapping around us. "Man, what if that guy's looking for us?" Warren whispered, breaking the silence. His voice, even hushed, seemed to bounce off the tiles with alarming clarity. "Shoo," I hissed, my eyes straining in the dark to catch any sign of movement beneath the stall door. "We don't even know who he is or what he's doing here." The logic did little to soothe the gnawing worry at the pit of my stomach. The reality was, we were two kids, hiding out during a lockdown that seemed more sinister than the standard drill. My mind raced with possibilities: a break-in, a disgruntled ex-employee, or worse, an armed intruder. Each thought was more terrifying than the last. We stayed like that, barely breathing, until the distant sound of sirens started to filter through the school's thick walls. The piercing wail was both a relief and a new wave of fear. Help was on the way, but the situation was serious enough to warrant police intervention. "Should we go out?" Warren whispered again, urgency lacing his words. "No, stay put until we know it's safe. They'll clear the building and find us," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The idea of leaving the supposed safety of our hiding spot seemed increasingly dangerous. The minutes continued to crawl by, each tick of my watch loud in the eerie stillness. Then, suddenly, the sound of footsteps approached. Heavy, slow, deliberate, nothing like the hurried pace of a teacher or a cop. My breath hitched, and Warren's hand found mine in the dark, squeezing it tightly as if our joined hands could ward off whoever was out there. The footsteps stopped right outside our stall. I could almost feel the presence of the person on the other side of the thin metal door. My heart leapt into my throat, stifling any sound I might have made. A shadow fell across the narrow gap at the bottom of the stall door, blocking out the faint light. Just then, a voice shattered the silence. A voice that was neither Warren's nor mine. "Is anyone in here?" it called out, authoritative and unfamiliar. Neither of us answered, barely even daring to breathe. After a pause that felt like an eternity, the voice spoke again, closer this time, as if right outside our stall. "I know you're in there. Come on out." The choice was made in silence, a mutual decision born of survival instinct more than reason. Slowly, cautiously, I reached up and unlatched the stall door. As it swung open, we were met not by the menacing figure of our imagination, but by the concerned face of a police officer, flashlight in hand. "You kids all right?" he asked, his voice a mix of relief and reprimand. "It's safe now. There's been an incident, but it's under control. Let's get you back to your classes." The flood of relief was palpable as we stepped out, following the officer through the dimly lit hallways, now safe under the watchful eyes of law enforcement. The lockdown was indeed due to a break-in. The man we saw turned out to be a disoriented homeless person who had somehow wandered into the school. Although it wasn't as sinister as our imaginations had conjured, the reality that our sanctuary could be so easily breached was chilling. Back in the light of the main floors, amidst the hustle of police and relieved teachers, Warren and I shared a look. No words were needed. Our shared adventure had bonded us in a way the typical school day never could. As we walked back to join our classmates, the adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by a dozen new emotions, ready to be dissected and discussed. But for now, we were just glad to be out of the basement, out of the dark, and back in the relative normalcy of our high school lives. The last day of high school was supposed to be a celebration, a bittersweet culmination of 4 years of growth, friendships, and education. But for me, that day was clouded by a mix of excitement and an undercurrent of sadness. The excitement was palpable. Freedom and the unknown adventures of college loomed ahead. Yet, the sadness stemmed from knowing I'd soon part ways with friends who had become like family. On this pivotal day, my emotions were further complicated by personal troubles at home. These issues cast a shadow over what should have been a joyous occasion, leaving me in a sour mood as I made my way through the school corridors. It was my 5th-hour biology class with Mr. Johnson, a teacher who had a reputation for being particularly harsh. His demeanor towards students often bordered on hostile, and his confrontational style had become legendary in the worst ways. I still don't understand how he hadn't been dismissed from his teaching duties. Given the circumstances at home and my reluctance to endure another hour under Mr. Johnson's scrutiny, I made a decision that seemed inconsequential at the time. I skipped class. Instead, I headed to the library, a place where I could hide away until my next class. Nestled in the back by the computers, I intended to pass the time inconspicuously. Although I was physically in the library, my mind was elsewhere, lost in games on my phone as I tried to block out the world. Suddenly, the calm was shattered by the sharp crackle of the school's intercom announcing a lockdown. Initially, I dismissed it as another drill. Our school had a protocol of conducting these exercises regularly, so I stayed put, assuming it was just another test of our preparedness. But then, a muffled scream echoed down the hallway, distorting the usual silence of our school's corridors. The screams were chilling, and a sense of dread began to creep in. It dawned on me that this might not be a drill after all. In a panic, I scrambled for a hiding place and ended up under the computer desks. It wasn't the most ingenious hiding spot, but it was all I could think of in the moment. As I lay there, the intercom remained ominously silent. Time stretched on, each minute punctuated by my escalating fear. I checked my phone. Over 20 messages flooded in from classmates, all in biology, asking about my whereabouts and confirming that this lockdown was real. My heart sank. The situation was far more serious than I had imagined. The library was eerily quiet, which was unusual. Normally, there would be at least a few students or a librarian present, but today, it seemed I was utterly alone. This isolation only heightened my anxiety. I waited, hoping against hope that this was just a terrible misunderstanding, that any moment now, the intercom would crackle back to life and announce the end of the drill. But the silence was broken again by screams and the sound of someone running in the hallways. The library doors suddenly swung open, and the faint outline of a person entered. I was paralyzed with fear, barely daring to breathe. Peeking out, I saw only the dark silhouette of someone around my height. They began searching the room with a flashlight, coming closer to my hiding spot by the second. I realized then that if I didn't act, I might be found anyway. In a split-second decision, I emerged from under the desk, facing the intruder head-on. To my shock, the flashlight's beam revealed the face of Tyler, a friend from middle school with whom I'd lost touch after a falling out. The sight of a gun in his hand was terrifying. "Tyler, what the hell are you doing, man?" I asked, my voice shaking. For a long moment, Tyler said nothing. Then, he broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I cautiously kicked the gun away from his reach and tried to console him, suggesting that we needed to do the right thing. Surprisingly, he listened. Together, we walked towards the office to find a teacher and eventually the police arrived. This harrowing experience underscored a stark reality. The transition from friend to potential assailant had been terrifyingly short. Tyler had been a victim too, bullied, isolated, and struggling with mental health issues. Yet, nothing could excuse the path he had nearly taken. As we walked together towards the authorities, I realized how crucial it was to address such issues proactively, to ensure that support and intervention were available to prevent such tragedies before they unfold. As Tyler and I walked down the silent hallways, flanked by police officers, the weight of the day's events began to truly settle on my shoulders. The halls of what should have been a place of celebration for me now echoed with the somber steps of law enforcement and the muffled whispers of my fellow students peeking from behind locked classroom doors. The reality of how drastically different this day could have ended was not lost on me. In the aftermath, as the police questioned Tyler and I gave my statement, I learned more about the depth of Tyler's struggles. He had felt alienated and misunderstood for years, compounded by a tumultuous home life and relentless bullying. His breakdown in the library wasn't just the result of a spur-of-the-moment decision, but the culmination of years of pent-up frustration and pain. The gun, which he had managed to bring into school, was a chilling testament to the depth of his desperation. During the interrogation, Tyler's tears and remorse were palpable. He confessed that finding me in the library had been a twist of fate. I realized then that our past connection, however strained it had become over the years, might have been what saved lives that day. If he had encountered someone else, someone who didn't know him as I had, the outcome might have been tragically different. This incident sparked a flurry of emotions within the school and the wider community. Parents, teachers, and students alike began to debate and discuss the need for better mental health resources and more robust security measures in schools. The consensus was clear. Our schools needed to be safe havens, not just from external threats, but also from the internal battles that many students like Tyler faced. The following weeks were filled with vigils, counseling sessions, and community meetings. As a witness and someone who had been close to the situation, I found myself often recounting the events to various audiences, advocating for change. The need for awareness about mental health, especially in educational environments, became a personal crusade. The image of Tyler, broken and desperate, served as a powerful reminder of the stakes involved. My own journey through the ordeal was complicated. Relief at having survived unharmed mixed with guilt for not having reached out to Tyler when signs of his distress might have first appeared. I also felt a profound gratitude for the support systems I had, family and friends who stood by me, who understood the emotional turmoil that such an event could stir. As I prepared to leave for college, my perspective on life and my role in it had shifted dramatically. I became more involved in initiatives focused on mental health, particularly those aimed at young people. The experience also shaped my academic and career goals. I found myself drawn to psychology and counseling, determined to help others who might be struggling silently as Tyler had. Looking back, that last day of high school remains a defining moment in my life. It was a harsh lesson in the fragility of human emotions and the impact of our actions on others. It reinforced my belief in the importance of compassion and proactive intervention. Most importantly, it taught me that while we cannot change the past, we have the power and the responsibility to shape a safer, more understanding future for all. As I moved forward, the lessons learned on that tumultuous day guided me, reminding me of the importance of connection, the urgency of addressing mental health openly, and the unyielding potential for recovery and redemption that lies within every community. This was not just my story, but a call to action for everyone who believes in the power of change and the necessity of empathy. It was a drab Tuesday in early October, the kind of day when the sky is a seamless gray sheet and the rain falls in a steady, unrelenting drizzle. My school, Maplewood Middle, operates on a split lunch schedule due to its sprawling student body. I, being a 7th grader, usually have my lunch during the first period, which includes all 6th graders and some of us from 7th grade. The second period caters to the remainder of the 7th graders and all the 8th graders. It's a system that by now, we've all gotten used to. That particular morning had been as mundane as any. Classes dragged on, filled with the typical chatter and shuffling of papers. By the time the bell rang for first lunch, everyone was more than ready to ditch the classrooms for the cafeteria. I grabbed my tray and was just deciding between pizza or the mystery meat when the normalcy of the day shattered. For loud booms echoed through the cafeteria. To me, they sounded like thunder, deep and resonant against the backdrop of the storm outside. I shrugged off the noise, attributing it to the weather. But the reaction around me was immediate and visceral. A collective scream ripped through the lunch crowd, a wave of panic that I initially scoffed at. I remember thinking they were all overreacting, until the campus security burst in. The urgency was clear in their actions and voices. Inside now, everyone moved to the multi-purpose room, they shouted, herding us away from the cafeteria. Confusion turned to curiosity as I followed the stream of students. Those still in line had to abandon their lunches, trays left unclaimed as they were rushed along. The multi-purpose room at Maplewood is expansive, the back wall entirely made of glass, offering a panoramic view of the sports fields behind. But today, that view was obscured. As we entered, I noticed security staff and several teachers hastily drawing the curtains, blocking the outside world from view. Every exit was manned by an adult, their faces etched with concern. Among the murmurs and whispers, my friend Eric nudged me. "I'm going to find out what's happening," he muttered, and slipped away toward one of the teachers. The rest of us huddled together, trading theories and trying not to let our imaginations get the better of us. When Eric returned, his face was pale, his usual smirk gone. "You know the houses?" he asked, referring to the small residential area adjacent to our school. I nodded, prompting him to continue. "There's this mentally disabled guy who's barricaded himself in front of his house. He's threatening to commit suicide and kill the cops if they try to evict him," Eric explained in a hushed tone. The room seemed to grow colder with his words. "He was walking around outside school earlier, watching us in a weird way." The news hit like a punch to the gut. The man, as we later learned, was a known sex offender, which only added to the gravity of the situation. We were kept in the multi-purpose room for what felt like an eternity, but was actually just over an hour, covering 2 class periods. The tension in the room was palpable as we waited for any news or indication that it was safe to leave. Eventually, we were escorted back to our classrooms, the hallways eerily quiet as teachers led us in single file. The gravity of the situation didn't fully sink in until later that day when I spoke to my friend Gloria. She lived next to the man and shared a chilling story from the previous Halloween. She had seen him at his window, cutting his arm and writing in his own blood, "Don't come here or I'll kill you." At the time, everyone thought it was just a gruesome Halloween decoration. Now, we knew better. This incident shook our sense of security, a stark reminder of the fragile barrier between normalcy and chaos. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the rain against my window, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering fear. Relief that the man had been contained before he could act on his threats, and fear of what might have been. It was a stark reminder that sometimes, real monsters lived just next door. The following days were tense. Our conversations no longer revolved around upcoming tests or weekend plans. Instead, we whispered about the man next door and what had happened. Teachers held assemblies to discuss safety and mental health, trying to reassure us, but the anxiety lingered like a dense fog. I noticed a change in the way we all walked to school, more cautious, eyes darting to unfamiliar cars or lingering strangers. Parents organized meetings with school officials, demanding stronger security measures and better communication protocols. Gloria seemed particularly affected. She had known about the man's unsettling behavior since Halloween, and now, knowing the full extent of his troubles weighed heavily on her. During lunch, she would often be quiet, lost in thought, her food untouched. One day, I sat next to her, nudging her gently. "Hey, you've been really quiet. Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. She looked at me, her eyes somber. "It's just seeing him that day, knowing what he was capable of. It's scary thinking he was right next door this whole time," she confessed. As the year progressed, the man's house was eventually cleared out and put up for sale. No one wanted to move in for a long time, the history of the house casting a long shadow. But eventually, a new family moved in, oblivious to the past drama. Life at Maplewood went on, the incident becoming a distant memory, discussed occasionally in the context of our school's history lessons on community and safety. It was a day so typical that nothing, not the slight chill in the air nor the restless buzz of high school corridors, suggested it would pivot so drastically. I was a sophomore at Crestwood High, nestled in a small town where the unexpected seldom happened. It was a Tuesday, the kind that rolled in quiet and unassuming after a vibrant weekend. Just after third hour, which was chemistry for me, the lunch bell rang, releasing a wave of students into the halls like a tide. My friends and I, always a tight-knit group since middle school, spilled into the cafeteria with our usual enthusiasm. Lunchtime was less about eating and more about decompressing from the morning's classes. We joked and swapped stories, our voices mingling with the dozens of others in the noisy room. We'd grab our food, scarf down what we could in the first few minutes, and spend the rest of the break caught up in whatever game or mischief we had going that day. About halfway through lunch, the normalcy of our routine shattered. The PA system crackled to life, and the voice of Mr. Harrison, our principal, echoed through the cafeteria. The tone of his voice, slightly strained and sharper than usual, instantly drew silence from the crowd. "Lockdown, lockdown, this is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building. Lock the door and turn off all lights," he announced. The sudden announcement jolted us. In drills, Mr. Harrison's voice was calm, controlled, and we were always forewarned. This time, his voice carried an edge of real urgency, the kind that sent a shiver down my spine. My friends, however, seemed to think it was part of a more realistic drill. But something in my gut twisted. The air felt too tense, the staff too anxious. In a moment that would later haunt me with its sheer stupidity, some of my friends, caught up in a surge of misguided bravado, suggested we sneak out of the cafeteria to explore. They were convinced it was the perfect time to roam the usually off-limits hallways without getting caught. Despite every alarm bell in my head, I followed. I guess there's a kind of invincibility you feel when you're with your friends, a sense that as long as you're together, things will turn out okay. We slipped through a side door, our laughter subdued but spirits high with the thrill of the forbidden. The school felt different with the power cut, shadows pooling in the corners of the hallways and the usual vibrancy replaced by a quiet dread. We split up after a few minutes, and soon it was just Andrew and me, our other friends disappearing into the darkened maze of Crestwood High. The dim light filtering through cloud-covered windows provided scant visibility, but we pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and adrenaline. Then, the sound of gunshots shattered the eerie silence. 3 sharp, unmistakable pops followed by a chorus of screams that echoed off the walls. Panic gripped us instantly. Andrew and I exchanged a look, a wordless agreement, and ran. We sprinted toward the main entrance, fueled by adrenaline and terror. The thought of hiding in a dark bathroom or a locked classroom felt suddenly suffocating. We needed to get out, to put as much distance as possible between us and the source of those gunshots. Emerging into the open, the reality of our vulnerability hit us. We were outside, exposed at the front of the school, potentially easy targets. Without pausing to think, we bolted towards the back of the school, aiming for the cover of the woods that bordered the soccer field. Our breaths came in sharp gasps, legs pumping, hearts racing as we dashed across the field. As we plunged into the safety of the trees, the distant sound of police sirens began to fill the air. They were getting closer, converging on Crestwood High from every direction. While part of me was relieved, they were coming to handle the shooter. The other part was seized by a new fear. What if they thought we were involved? We had run, after all, and nothing looked guiltier than running. Hiding in the woods, we tried to calm down, our breaths echoing loud in the quiet. The situation was surreal, like a scene from one of those crime shows I'd watched with my parents. But this was no TV drama. It was real, and it was happening to us. Eventually, as we huddled among the trees, the inevitable happened. The police, conducting a thorough sweep of the area, stumbled upon us. They were stern, their faces grim as they detained us, not unkindly, but firmly, until they could figure out what was going on. It was during this tense time that we learned about the shooter, a kid from another school, intent on harm but thankfully unsuccessful. I remember thinking how absurd it was, the police questioning me while I was scared out of my mind, the real shooter somewhere out there. And then, the eerie realization of how similar we looked. Same height, same hair color and style, dressed similarly on that fateful day. It was like looking into a dark mirror, one that reflected a path I could never imagine taking. When the truth came out, and it was clear we had nothing to do with the violence, relief washed over me in an overwhelming wave. But so did the gravity of our foolishness. Sneaking around during a lockdown wasn't just dumb. It was dangerous, and it could have ended so much worse. That day taught me a harsh lesson in responsibility and the real-world consequences of making poor decisions in critical moments. As the events of that day settled into the fabric of our school's history, they left a mark on me, forever changing how I viewed safety, friendship, and the importance of making wise choices. Fresh out of college at 23 and back at my old high school, not as a student but as an IT intern, life had a funny way of bringing me full circle. Landing a job here was a mixture of nostalgia and excitement, a throwback to the days when I roamed these halls as a teenager. I could thank my fortune for this gig to my former computer teachers, Mr. Jenkins, Miss Cole, and Mr. Hanley, who had not only taught me the ins and outs of computer science but had truly believed in me. Their recommendation had made it possible for me to snag this position. The job was nestled in an unexpected sanctuary, a nicely outfitted office in the school's basement. Despite the surrounding areas being cluttered and somewhat dingy, our office was an oasis. It boasted 3 spacious desks, dual mini-fridges, a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, and, most luxuriously, the only air conditioning unit in the building that wasn't in the principal's office. Alongside the perks were the crucial bits, like the humming school servers and various tech gadgets that kept the school's digital lifeblood flowing. I shared this space with two coworkers, Derek and Leo, both of whom were out on the day the incident happened, dealing with administrative tasks upstairs. I was settling into my usual lunch routine, a turkey sandwich in one hand and scrolling through updates on my phone with the other, when my phone buzzed with a call from the front office. The voice on the other end was terse, the words chilling. "We're on lockdown. Someone possibly armed has entered the school." In an instant, my casual lunch break morphed into a high-stakes crisis. My heart raced. The sandwich, now unappetizing, was tossed aside. I flicked off the lights and shut down my computer screen to shroud my corner of the basement in darkness. As nice as our office was, it lacked a crucial feature, an actual door, leaving a gaping, vulnerable entry. Even the main door to the basement had a faulty lock, hardly a reassurance. I texted Derek and Leo, seeking any bit of information or reassurance, but neither replied. Anxiety mounted as I sat back down, alone in the dim glow of my phone screen, launching a game to distract myself. The sounds of my casual game felt absurdly out of place in the silence that enveloped the room. About 20 minutes into the lockdown, the basement door creaked ominously open. The sound sent a spike of fear through me as I contemplated my next move. Footsteps echoed on the stairway, growing louder as they approached my office. In a reflex of self-preservation, I slid under my desk, pushing my chair in to obscure my hiding spot. The office remained dark. The only sounds now were the soft, deliberate steps of someone entering. The tension in the air was palpable, my every breath seeming to echo around the room. Then, the dreaded sound, a ding from my phone signaling a text message. I froze, teeth clenched, heart pounding in my ears. The footsteps halted, then started again, closer this time. Driven by a mixture of fear and resignation, I burst from under the desk with a plea, "Please don't hurt me." The figure halted, and a hand reached out, pulling me to my feet. The man was dressed casually in a red plaid button-up and jeans, his face obscured under a reddish-black cap. His grip was firm but not threatening. "It's okay. I'm just down here hiding with you." "What's going on up there?" he whispered urgently. Still trembling, I responded with a shaky voice about the exits, pointing vaguely in the direction he should go. His next question was almost an afterthought. "Who are you?" He explained hurriedly that he was just a dad, caught in the lockdown while coming to pick up his son. Relief began to wash over me, dulled only by the continuing absence of replies from Derek and Leo. That brief respite shattered with another ding from my phone. Glancing down, I saw Derek's text, "Dude, this is crazy. Some guy with a gun shot Mr. Buckley. He's wearing a red shirt and hat. Don't come upstairs." My heart dropped to my stomach as I reread the message. Looking up, I met the eyes of the man in red, the pieces clicking together with terrifying clarity. The man's expression changed as he noticed my stare shift from confusion to horror. His next move was a desperate dash, presumably towards the exit I had unwittingly pointed out. In a blind panic, I sprinted for the upstairs, my mind racing with the images of what might happen if he got to his intended destination. A gunshot rang out behind me, a sound so loud and close it felt like it echoed inside my very skull. I heard the bullet ricochet, a metallic ping in the darkness, but I didn't stop to look back. Bursting through the basement door and into the chaos above, I was met by the immediate and firm grasp of police officers who had secured the scene. They were quick to respond, and as I later learned, they apprehended the man just as he tried to exit the building. The relief that Mr. Buckley had survived was immense, but the weight of what had transpired was overwhelming. The details emerged slowly. The shooter had a grievance with Mr. Buckley, the specifics of which remained murky but clearly deep-seated. In the aftermath of the lockdown and the shooting, the atmosphere at the school was one of palpable relief mixed with lingering anxiety. I returned to my basement office the next day, the space feeling far less like the sanctuary it had been before. The school community was shaken but resilient. Meetings were held to discuss the event and how to improve safety measures. Parents, staff, and students contributed their thoughts in sessions that were sometimes charged with emotion, but always underpinned by a collective desire to protect and strengthen our community. The administration decided to install a proper door with a secure lock for the basement office and review all school safety protocols. In these discussions, the story of Mr. Buckley's confrontation with the shooter was retold in various forms, each iteration attempting to piece together a motive from the sparse facts. It was known that the two had history, details of which were only rumored and whispered about in the corridors. Mr. Buckley himself was on leave, recovering both physically and mentally from the incident. The school rallied around him, sending messages of support and flowers to his home, affirming their collective wish for his speedy recovery. As for myself, I struggled with the residual effects of the ordeal. The sound of the gunshot echoed in my dreams, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. I found solace in my work, burying myself in server checks and software updates, using the routine to anchor my shaken nerves. Dave and Gary, having returned to the basement, shared in the somber mood, but also provided a semblance of normalcy with their banter and coffee runs.